Okay, here we are back with our Unit 3 with the focus on Africa in the post-World War II era. Today's objective will be to look to define Pan-Africanism and look at also look at the term self-determination and see its impact on Africa in post-World War II. So first of all, we begin these units by tying in past events. And before World War II, you see pictured there Winston Churchill and President Roosevelt. They had an agreement when America would enter the war and became known as the Atlantic Charter or Atlantic Agreement. And we're going to focus on that second bullet there. One of the 8 principal points was that all people had a right to self-determination. And all people, meaning people around the world, had a right to choose what type of government they would have. So I just want to read this great quote up here. I thought that when they said the Atlantic Charter, they meant me and everybody, in Africa and Asia and everywhere. But it seems like the Atlantic is an ocean it doesn't touch anywhere but North America and Europe. And obviously, Ms. Hurston, that's a criticism that after World War II, Great Britain and England will not fight for the rights of people around the world to determine themselves. So again, simple definition, textbook definition here, self-determination, the process by which a country determines its own statehood. And then if it wants to form alliances and have its own government, they determine that themselves. So going back to World War II, one of the things that the issues that Churchill and Roosevelt were focusing on was maybe these wars are happening because people are living under someone else's rule. Why don't we give them their own determination, their own statehood? So obviously you see self-determination in that explanation. So as we look at Africa, the term Pan-Africanism, and it's the idea that people of African descent have common interests and should be unified. So there was talk of maybe I'm just using the example, the United States of Africa, like the United States of America. And they're going to have this the flag they're going to use there, as we see up top there. But jumping ahead, not ruining the story, but there will be no unified African nation. But historically, Pan-Africanism has taken on the shape of a political and cultural movement, meaning there is common culture, and maybe politically they can work together and still be independent. So you see this term negritude movement. And the negritude movement is going to be important for Pan-Africanism because it's pride in the culture. And again, tying something back to American history in the 1920s with the Harlem Renaissance, the rebirth of culture, of music, literature, poetry that was in Harlem. It was very similar that these ideas will spread to the African nation. So it was a literary movement of Black writers that celebrated their cultural identity and pride in their culture. So, when you look at history, the big criticism often is it's told from a Western point of view. It only focuses on certain literature, certain art, certain poetry. So the negritude movement was a response that many Blacks felt that their history, their music, their literature was alienated and never really covered in history. So we're going to see that in October 1945, and again, just a reference here, World War II will end in September of 1945. 87 delegates came together for the 5th Pan-African Congress. And the big purpose, the singular purpose, was going to be the liberations of hundreds of millions of Africans living under colonial rule. And we started this unit in Section 1 discussing that imperialism and the domination by European nations. So the focus of this Congress was basically, how do these African nations get to be self-determined? How do they get to choose their own destiny? And yes, there was talk at this conference of one African nation. And they were planning at this to have a continent-wide newspaper where, again, communication. We today seem to look at everything through the lens of the internet and, digital media. Obviously, back then, newspapers were the major form of communication. The major obstacle they ran into right away was that the many different languages that crossed this vast continent, made it very difficult to communicate. And again, there, if you look, the northern part, you have the Arabic. There were Spanish-speaking parts, Swahili, traditional African. It's very diverse continent. So the goal of maybe forming this country was going to be very difficult. One thing we're going to focus on, again, if you're noticing these first two sections, there's a lot of terms that we're going to focus on. So this word is French for coup d'état. And the coup d'état is the sudden violent overthrow of an existing government by a small group. And we're going to see throughout Africa many of these independence movements, when they are not given their independence, they will resort to violence. And the chief prerequisite of a coup is definitely having control of the armed forces and the police and other elements. And that will be important. Okay, so that's going to take us out of the background information for this, and we'll pick up the individual countries in section 3.